Welcome to the CX sponsored webinar by Thematic about winning CX buy-in, what's working, what's not. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alyona. I'm a CXP program assistant with the CXPA. This webinar will be recorded and made available in the CX toolbox within the public resources section of the CXPA website. And for our CXP certified attendees, this webinar is CAU eligible and will be recorded in your account within 2 weeks. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Annette Franz, Alyona, Buyin, Gary Batroff, and our moderators, Stephen Pratt. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them via the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We will post the answers along with the recording on our website. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Stephen to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. It's great to be here today. Really excited for this conversation that we're about to have and some of these survey results we're about to go into. Few housekeeping items before we get started. So the way that this whole thing and conversation started is we decided to do a survey to the CXPA member base looking for executive buy-in. And we were offering a $100 gift card to a lucky participant in that survey. So at the end of the webinar, we're going to do a drawing and we'll see if that person is online or not. But before we go further and dig into this kind of idea of winning CX buy-in, what we've been learning from the CXPA member base on this, I wanted to introduce our panelists and let them each give a little bit of information about themselves and why the topic of kind of winning executive buy-in for CX is interesting and important to them. So I'll start with Annette, if you'd like to say a little bit about yourself, Annette. And I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I am. Thank you. I've had this whole conversation with myself. Sorry about that. Thank you for that. All right, let's start again. Thanks for having me, and thank you everybody for attending. My name is Annette Franz, and I am founder and CEO of CX Journey Inc. I am also the vice chair of the board of directors for the CXPA. I'm excited about this topic because without this, you're not going anywhere, right? You've got to have executive commitment to, and we'll talk more about this, I know, but you've got to have that to get anywhere with your CX transformation. So I'm excited to share some thoughts on your findings, and this is going to be a great conversation. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Annette. And Gary, you're up next.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Gary Batroff. I'm a senior manager in the CX practice at West Monroe Partners, where I help clients with CX strategies, CX analytics, and improving financial impact of their CX programs, which often is important to get buy-in. So it seems that in recent times, I'm hearing a lot more about the importance of buy-in in the CX community, and it's getting a lot more attention, and for good reason. So I'm excited to discuss today's topic.
Great. Then Alyona.
Thank you, Stephen. Hi. So great to be here. My name is Alyona, and my background is in machine learning and natural language processing. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Thematic, and we analyze customer feedback to help companies improve their customer experience. Why am I passionate about this topic is because our entire product is about providing data and stories to help customer professionals get buy-in. What's really fun to share as well is that in his previous role, my co-founder was one of those executives dismissing the CX request that he got from his team. So if our product can get buy-in with him, then it convinced anybody.
Great. Thank you, Alyona. And before we go into the survey and the questions that we had asked everybody, just one more housekeeping item. So everybody does have the ability to chat. We're keeping our eyes open on the chats. So our agenda here will be to go through the survey results. We'll have a discussion about it with the different panelists, and then some time for dedicated Q&A. But if things come up that are interesting to you, or you have questions, anybody can feel free to send a chat. and I will do my best to weave that into our conversation. So with that said, let's go through here and look at some of the survey questions that we had asked to the CXPA member base about executive buy-in. We received 150 responses for our survey that was focused on getting decision makers to help improve customer experience. The questions that we're going to focus on here today had to do with a rating, which was how would you rate the level of buy-in amongst your executive stakeholders? And then we asked two open-ended questions and let people say in their own words. First of all, what have you found to be the most helpful? And second, what obstacles have prevented you from securing buy-in from stakeholders? We actually have a whole white paper that we're producing with the CXPA on the rest of the survey. We'll send information to everybody on the webinar about those results. But we're going to focus on these open ends for this conversation. A few things to note: 75% of the responses came from people who had over 3 years experience in CX, and the average buy-in score out of 5 was 3.1. We did notice that this was 25% higher in places where executives were bought into a CX metric and tied to financials and customer feedback. So looking at some of the results here from the rating, we saw that the vast majority of people, or the largest set of responses that is, were rating themselves as average, and tapers off. It's a pretty clean little bell curve here over to very poor and excellent. So when people are rating their level of buy-in amongst executive stakeholders, this is our distribution. When we got into the open ends, and this is where Thematic comes in, we used our own software to analyze the open ends and uncover the themes that people were speaking about. So what we decided to do here was compare people who had good and excellent ratings of their buy-in with those who had extremely poor or poor ratings of their buy-in, and look at what's helping and what's most effective for both of those groups. And some clear trends emerged here. So as you can see on the very bottom view, everybody mentioned communication and being able to make a business case as key to securing executive buy-in. But those who had above average levels were 2.5 times as likely to reference data and metrics. They're twice as likely to include customer feedback, and they're 40% more likely to reference strategy and planning as one of the things that they will do to secure buy-in. Any commentary or reactions to this from any of our panelists?
I'll go ahead and start. I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead,
Annette.
Thanks. My first thought is that we're going to say the same thing anyways, aren't we? My initial thought here as I'm listening to this is, it's all tied together, right? It's almost saying the same thing or repeating the same thing, and that is, telling the story and building your business case and using data and metrics to do that, right? So I think it's I probably, as we prep for this webinar, one of the things we talked about is that it's pretty much a no-brainer that we all know that in order to get this buy-in and this commitment that we've got to build the business case, it's the number one way to do that. And in order to do that, we've got to have the data and the metrics and the feedback and all of that. And we've got to have great communication skills so that we can sell and influence and do all of that. So those are my sort of initial thoughts on that.
Gary, what would you add to that?
I would say pretty similar in that I think this is showing that the companies that are successful at getting buy-in they have the tools and the data teams and the metrics available to them to provide evidence that makes sure that they get that buy-in and secure that buy-in. So I think that data and analytics and metrics makes a lot of sense around what people are saying. I think strategy and planning, I think, is particularly interesting too, because that's kind of like governance, right? And so that means that there is probably some good governance going on at those companies, and they've got a nice CX strategy, and they've got a team of executives that make sure action is taken on their CX data. That's kind of what I'm seeing in the tea leaves here.
But what I find interesting is that, totally agree with both of you. What's also interesting is that people who have poor buy-in rating, when they were asked what are the effective strategies, they're less likely to mention data and metrics. So are there some kind of nuggets of wisdom that can be learned from the survey, just how that it's actually more important than people think on average to have the data and the metrics?
Yeah, that's where you're seeing the biggest variation between the haves and the have-nots of buy-in, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's take a look at what's getting in the way. So, I mean, clear takeaway point from here is that we all know, of course, in CX, we have to be able to make a strong business case and communicate that. And clear leaders in this space are incorporating data and metrics, and they're also kind of bringing in customer feedback to make that happen. Looking at what's getting in the way. So the question is, what obstacles have prevented you from securing buy-in from your stakeholders? And again, some clear patterns emerged here when we looked at everybody's open ends. So practitioners reporting average and below average levels of buy-in were 3 times as likely to mention a customer-focused company and culture and the degree to which their company is kind of bought in to CX as a barrier. They're 33% more likely to list communication issues with executives as reasons why they can't get that buy-in, and they're 33% more likely to mention strategy and planning. Any reactions to this kind of set of patterns?
I'll jump in on this, and I'll focus on that last point. And I think this is really important because as we went through the comments of what made up strategy and planning, there were things like business as usual, competing priorities, risk, short-term thinking, and those are all negative sort of things that keep the organization from moving forward and being able to transform. I think one of the things that was really interesting to me is competing priorities, and I've heard this more and more often lately, and my stance on that is, what on earth competes with your customers? Why are there competing priorities? Aren't we in business, for the customer and because of the customer and all of those things? So what could possibly compete with that particular priority, your customers? And so there's got to be this shift in thinking and shift in the way things are done. And yes, culture is closely tied to that, right? That's sort of the foundation and the root of it. And culture comes from above, right? It's defined and deliberately designed by your CEO and by your executives. So again, it's all tied together. But that one sort of stood out to me as a really interesting bit of commentary there.
Excellent. Gary?
Yeah, I would say totally agree with Annette just said, and that things are top down, and so your executives who aren't bought in are not driving the culture towards customer centricity, and they're not creating good CX strategies. Those that are driving customer centricity and have a good CX strategy in place.
A great point. I mean, it puts CX folks in a really unique position. I think we keep seeing over and over again. We're working within a top-down organization, and then we're also oftentimes kind of in that position of bringing bottoms-up perspective into the organization. And just like Annette said, I mean, aligning the entire organization on what those priorities are is something that is so key within this role, and something that we'll get into later on in the webinar. So. Looking at both of these things, when we all got together and chatted about this the other day, the big kind of so what, some of these things are no-brainers. Noticing in that first kind of reaction about data and metrics and the importance of that, and then kind of the struggle, with culture and business as usual. Kind of when we looked at these things, we identified 3 real keys or topics to focus the conversation on. And we'll go through each of these, allow some conversations. People, please feel free to chime in during chat as we go through this. But the first is buy-in versus commitment, and kind of why buy-in really isn't enough. A great point that kind of surfaced. The second is connecting CX to metrics executives really care about. And then the third is strategy and planning. So we'll go here first to buy-in versus commitment. And what you're looking at on this slide is that comment that Annette referenced earlier on. I love that getting beyond business as usual. And if your customer isn't your business as usual, then what is? Something's going on here. But Annette, I'd love to hear maybe you speak a little bit about this, because the topic you're so passionate about. As you can see, I've brought your favorite meal here as well. So you can reference that as well.
It is my favorite meal. Yes, it is. So, I don't think it's semantics. I think there is a real difference between buy-in and commitment, right? Buy-in is like, yeah, sounds good. And commitment is, man, we are putting our money where our mouth is, right? The CEO and the executives are saying, here are resources, time, financial, capital, human resources, go do this now, right? And so yes, the graphic or the image that you've got posted here is my favorite way of explaining the difference between buy-in and commitment, and that is the story of the chicken and the pig, right? The chicken says to the pig, hey, let's start a restaurant. And the pig says, awesome, what are we going to call it? And the chicken says, how about ham and eggs? And the pig says, well, then I'm committed and you're just involved. So I think it's really sort of my favorite way of distinguishing between the two. But commitment is so much more than buy-in. Like I said, buy-in is just, yeah, sounds like a good idea, let's do it. But commitment is putting your money where your mouth is.
What are ways? I mean, any of our panelists can answer this, but what are the ways that we get that level of commitment? I mean, I think what we see a lot is, unless we get that kind of commitment, generally CX professionals wind up on a platter like this. So what do we make of that?
True story. Well, I think there's, you have to appeal to the logical, to the right and the left brain, right? To the logical side and the emotional side, right? So you've got to play the numbers game, right? We've already talked about this. You've got to build a business case. You've got to tie everything to outcomes, right? And talk about money, because that's where your CEO's head is at, right? So, and then you've got to, you've got some quick wins that you can show, hey, this is real. This thing works and it's real, and here's what it can do for us and what it can do for the business, right? This is really about the data and the numbers and even identifying, your CEO or one of your executives, they're what I call their passion projects, right? And it's maybe the CEO wants to leave a certain legacy, or maybe the, one of the other executives has a project that they're really trying to achieve as they're, helping run the business, run the organization. And so if you can link how customer experience and a customer-centric culture can help them achieve those things, then, telling that story, again, tying it to numbers and the other thing that you can do is disprove that our CX is good enough. I think that's what ends up happening a lot with executives. They say, our experience is good enough. Look, we've got all these great, we've got all these customers and they're spending X amount of dollars with us. Well, just think about how many more dollars they could spend with us if we had, incrementally better or massively better, experience for them. So that's sort of the logical side. And then on the emotional side, right, we got to bring in the customer stories. We've got to tell customer stories, let them hear things from the customer's mouths. We can use verbatims, we can use, video interviews with customers. We can bring them into journey mapping workshops. We can set up a customer immersion program. We can do our own sort of undercover executive type program, but in ways that we can really impact the executives by saying, look, this is how we make our customers feel. And I've seen it done. I've done it many times with journey mapping workshops, for example, where the CEO will sit in and be like, wow, I didn't realize that we made our customers feel like we don't care about them, and that's really the human component of the experience, right? It's people to people. And when we hear that we're, doing that to other people, it's not a great feeling. So those are some of the ways that you can get that commitment.
I love that whole idea of a kind of passion project that you mentioned, and really digging into what makes the executives tick. Something that we see over and over again is people who really struggle. I mean, they empathize really deeply for the customer, and they're really good at putting themselves in the customer's shoes. And when the executives don't listen to their perspectives, there's this frustration that kind of emerges. And, it's what we've seen is people who are able to be as equally, or maybe just almost as empathic toward their executive, are the ones who are able to identify what's actually going to move the needle for them, and kind of connect the two worlds. Does that resonate at all?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say you probably see a lot of companies out there these days that will say that they're bought in and will say that they're committed. But in reality, it's really just lip service, right? They're saying it because they think it's the right thing to do. When you look for evidence of it actually happening, like, okay, do they have a significant CX budget? Do they have good CX tools? Do they have a sizable CX team? Is the CEO mentioning, customer experience at the all hands meetings or in the quarterly, earnings calls? Do they have CX pillars, as part of their overall strategy as a company? If you don't see those evidence, then you really may not even have buy-in. And so I think one way you can get that is, of course, as we mentioned, appeal to their empathetic side and try to get them to walk in the shoes of their customers. But another way is just educating them about what CX is and why it's important. And then ending that with that linkage to those financial metrics, which is a language that they understand, right? They talk about dollars all day long. They don't talk about NPS all day long. So show them how when NPS moves, revenue goes up, and that'll get their attention.
Right. So connecting, that's our next topic that we're going to get into, which is great. So it's connecting metrics to revenue. I think there's real quick here, a question just popped in. So people are asking, for organizations who reported good or excellent buy-in, were they referencing actual data points or numbers and pitches? What was really meant by data and metrics? Quick answer for that is that our white paper will get much more into that. But the more nuanced answer, which I'll give a brief overview of, is that so we use Thematic to kind of look at the open ends. We wanted to let people kind of speak in their own words, so it was a variety. We had people who were specifically saying, we've connected customer data to metrics that executives care about. We had people specifically saying, showing the ROI. So it's a big range in there that we aggregated that the report will share a little bit more about. Cool. Any other thoughts on this topic of buy-in commitment? I mean, one thing I'd love to really kind of hear is, is there a time in an organization where that kind of gung-ho for the customer just isn't there? What are some ways to really shift the culture? To what extent can someone shift the culture? Is there a time when someone should just go to a different place where that culture is there? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think so shifting a culture is really a mindset shift, and it's a behavior shift, right? We know that culture is values plus behaviors. So the right values have to be in place first and foremost. And that's why I said earlier that this customer-centric culture has to be deliberately designed from the top to be exactly that. And in order to do that, you've got to bring in the voice of the customer. Right? You've got to bring in the feedback. It's all about customer understanding. I say customer understanding is the cornerstone of customer centricity, and that's what's going to help shift. First of all, you've got to have the values in place, and then the behavior is defined and aligned with that. But then start bringing in the voice of the customer into everything that you do. Start if you don't have personas developed yet, develop personas. Let people really understand who our customers are, what their needs are, their pain points, the problems they're trying to solve, and then socialize those personas. You've got to socialize the voice of the customer as well. And then journey mapping, right? I mean, that's a great way for people to walk into customer shoes and really understand the experience that they're having today, and then ultimately to design a better experience for tomorrow. But again, you've got to socialize and you've got to operationalize all of that. So that's it really is. It's a mindset shift and a behavior shift. And I don't see, it's just excuses. I think if people say, oh, well, we can't. We're not going to do that because we can't. There's baby steps. I always call it baby steps. There's always things, and that's why I said earlier about quick wins. There's always things that you can do in your department, for example, just to start to show that there's a real, this is a real thing, right? That if we improve the experience, we're going to keep more customers, we're going to save more at-risk customers, or there's going to be cost efficiencies and those kinds of things. So it's really just a matter of getting started and then using that to springboard from there.
Anything to add to that, Gary?
Yeah, I would definitely agree that, put journey maps and personas everywhere on the walls as posters, right? Get people in that mode to think about customers and using the names of the personas, like in meetings, right? Some of the best CX companies I've seen have like little figurines of an actual customer on all the conference tables. First Republic Bank is one of those companies that does that. So it helps people be conscious of who the customer is all the time when they're making decisions. I think also you're not going to convert everyone. Some people are naturally empathetic. People in the call center will probably get this a lot more than people in finance. So look for your points of cooperation and look for your points of resistance and spend your energy more towards the points of cooperation, at least as a first step. Look at guerrilla tactics, things that you can do to go around and shift the culture, such as like a newsletter is a technique that I see that's been used really well, where the company really didn't have much budget, but they asked every department in the company to contribute customer stories or ways in which they are positively impacting the customer experience, and then publishing that newsletter internally for everyone to see. And the groups that aren't in the initial newsletter want to be in the next version. So just kind of look at those guerrilla tactics that you can use, where you can go around the system and you don't require big budgets. Right.
All right. I love the great points and great, I think, pointers kind of into our next focus here, which is connecting CX metrics to metrics that executives care about. So I think, we agree, really there's a lot of things that we can do bottoms up opportunistically to really shift the culture. But according to our data, and I think common sense too, it's not going to go anywhere if we don't really make that connection to high level metrics. And that's one of the things that Thematic does really well. It's our main focus is kind of using our artificial intelligence to find themes in customer feedback, and then use those to map to metrics that matter to the company and uncover different drivers. So I think Alyona had an example to kind of walk us through here on this one.
Yeah, I'd love to share a story of how a company used Thematic to get Buyin to actually do the change, commit to the change, and then evaluate what it actually has done to both CX metrics and financial metrics. So this is a story of a company that specializes in TV network and satellite TV network, very kind of an old school TV provider. And what was happening is that in their NPS feedback, they noticed that the NPS score started to drop. And so of course the executives have to ask, what's happening here? Why is it dropping? So what we were able to do here is actually address those key winning strategies from our survey on multiple levels. First of all, how do we link the feedback to the score? So in the feedback, we're able to pick up themes such as some new changes they've made to their TV network, or ability to or complaints about repeats, or something is being difficult to read on the guide. And then we can basically say, if we didn't have those issues, what would the NPS score be then? And we can also show in a waterfall chart, which very much speaks to the way executives view their data, how all of these themes are affecting their NPS score. So the story with this TV provider was that they have done some changes to their TV guide. They changed the font and the background and everything, but they forgot to test it on old style TVs, and it literally didn't work. Suddenly they could see this theme, hard to read, font is hard to read, small and difficult, and so on, popping up. We discover all of these themes in the data. You don't have to tell us what these issues are, which is very important because we want to tell you things that you don't know, issues that are on the rise, or things that customers noticed, but if you keep focusing on very kind of high-level things like too expensive, or poor customer service, you won't notice. So what they were able to do then is show with that waterfall chart that this needs fixing ASAP, and the product team started to roll out changes over time to improve the look and feel of the TV guide so that it can be read. And as you can see here, not only the volume for that particular theme has started to drop over time, but also its impact on NPS. So here we had the evidence that and the proof that the changes that were made have actually made a difference. This is the data and the metrics that the CX team was able to show. In addition, of course, the issues with TV weren't just mentioned in NPS surveys, but also in call centers. And so we at Thematic, we also analyze in detail, why are people actually calling? What are the issues that they have? Because we don't want them to call because it costs money. So by making this change, the company also reduced the volume of calls on that particular issue, which translates into real money. You can calculate how, what is the overall saving here that resulted from this.
So great example. I mean, using customer feedback, not just to try to get an executive to feel something emotional. Maybe they're going to feel it, maybe they won't. But turning that into a specific insight, and then using the same source of feedback to show that particular solution has worked. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we love to see. And Gary, what types of what are your best practices or things in your playbook for being able to connect CX to metrics that will get executives' attention?
One of the things that I have been using a lot lately is the CX Balance Scorecard, where I try to get all the organizations of a company that impacts the customer experience to collaborate in a workshop and bring forth the KPIs that they think are really the ones that are driving customer experience quality, driving loyalty, and in turn driving financial impact. And getting alignment across the organization with the scorecard, as opposed to tracking 600 metrics across 15 tabs of an Excel spreadsheet with 45 different charts that no one ever is going to read. So I'm finding that tool is getting a lot of traction these days. But I think getting to those executives and those stakeholders and using KPIs that they care about and meeting them where they're at, I think is an important step to take.
Awesome. Anything to add to that?
I love that. Yeah. There's a tool, or we'll call it a tool that I use that really starts with once you've identified what the customer's pain point is and what the initiative will be in order to fix that, to then put together sort of this, four-step or four-part, tool or visualization for your executives, so that it's here's what the initiative is, and what it entails and how much it costs. That's the first part. The second part is here's the impact on the customer and the customer experience. How will it affect the customer emotionally or in terms of the experience itself? Then the third part of that story or that picture is what metrics, both customer experience and operational metrics, are impacted by this, right? And then the last step in the tool is to then tie that to business outcomes. So if we do all of this, if we fix this thing, what's the business outcome? Is it retention? Is it revenue? Is it profitability? Is it cost savings? What is it that we're getting as a result of this?
Love that. No, great steps for getting to that metric. I love this question that just came in. I mean, let me read it. If the executive team is not committed to CX, then what are they doing? Surely their jobs are to grow the business, and you do that by getting customers to buy more. And if the experience is bad, they will leave. Am I being naive or too simplistic with this? It just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, it kind of does, but what are your reactions to this?
I mean, I would say, I find a very unusual behavior amongst executives and companies in that they're hyper-focused on acquiring customers, but not very focused on retaining those customers, even though there's plenty of evidence that says that it costs 6 to 8 times more money to acquire a customer than it does to retain one. And I think part of that is people like to hunt and people like new revenue from new customers. And so I think that kind of drives that behavior. I don't know, that's kind of my CX psychologist hat there, but I'm not really sure why that happens. Maybe Annette has a good opinion on that.
No, I'm not sure either. I don't, yeah.
Makes us all kind of scratch our head.
Yeah.
And at least it gives us plenty of work to do. I mean, and this is a perfect, I think, segue into our last point. Oh, well, before we get here, we also have a model too. Just wanted to make a plug for this. Alyona, if you wanted to say a few things. We've got some worksheets and spreadsheets.
So one of the insights, as you will see in the white paper from the survey, is that those who experience good or excellent level of buy-in, 16% of those mention ROI as their most effective strategy, and those who don't tend to mention this. Only one person among 35 said that ROI is a good strategy. Well, but clearly it is, and what we have done recently is we have written a guide, and there's a URL, so it's on our blog, the article called ROI of CX. And what this article does, it basically walks you through why is it so hard to prove the ROI of CX, how you should think about it, what are some of the simple tools that can help you, simple numbers you can request or find within your organization, and how you should be thinking about it. The basic idea is to look at a customer experience metric that measures customer experience, but then tied back to financials. So, for example, for NPS, our promoters actually spending more with your company. You could also than detractors, or you could look at, are they more likely to bring their friends, or like referring other business to you, or are detractors more likely to churn? So whatever that financial metrics you have, if you could categorize it into those customers who report higher numbers on CX surveys like NPS or CSAT, or you could even look at how often people are contacting the call center and what's different about those people who do and who don't. And then, so then you can say, well, if I will be implementing the CX program, my goal is to improve the CX metric, but ultimately it will make a huge change to the financial, and this is what this change could look like. And this is your ROI. So there's a spreadsheet where you can put in your numbers and play with it. And as being an executive myself, seeing this kind of case, business case, is very hard to say no to.
So yeah, definitely important being able to do that homework. We've seen customers of ours kind of really get their entire analytics teams involved, improving not just the NPS or whatever their metric is this good thing to shoot for, but that it has real proven implications that matter, to their company and their executives. So with that, I mean, if we have these types of metrics, we've done our job to get them. It still leaves. How do we turn that into actual plans? How do we actually operationalize that? How do we take that into the organization? And that brings up our third topic, which was effective strategy and planning. And this, I mean, kind of want to focus this loosely on kind of high-level governance structures and ground-level socialization, which is kind of where I think a lot of times, the best intentions, the best customer feedback, even the best metrics can get lost. So what do you guys have to say about this idea of kind of high-level governance structures and the importance of working with those?
I'll jump in here, and I don't know about high-level governance structures. I believe that you've got to have a governance structure in place to, get this done, right? For this transformation to happen, for this work to happen. And so, really, for me, governance structures there's two parts to them, right? There's the people structure part of it, and then there's also sort of the operating model portion of it. And the operating model portion of it is really around your vision, how are you going to, how are you going to socialize and operationalize the feedback? How are you going to mobilize the organization to, act on what we hear, and all of those kinds of things, right? It's an operating model. It's what kind of data do we have? What are we going to do with it? Who's going to use it? A lot of those kinds of things as well. The structure part of it is the people part of it, right? It's the various committees that you'll have in place to get this grassroots groundswell that you need in order to get organizational adoption, in order for ultimately for the transformation to happen. And so that structure includes your core CX team. It includes a variety of different committees, an executive committee, a culture committee, a CX champions committee, and there may be a host of other committees, but it's bringing together people from around the organization to be in those committees. Helps to connect or to break down silos, whichever is most appropriate for your organization, and also just again brings everyone together and allows everybody to understand how they're going to be a part of this transformation work.
Yeah, I would add that most companies don't have governance. Their voice of the customer or their CX teams are relying on good data and charts and evidence and insights to present to people and asking them to logically change. And human nature just doesn't work like that all the time. And so if you don't have a governance structure in place, get one, I would say. Even if you have to start small and it's only a small number of functional groups within the structure, but just start building it. And because every functional area of the business has a long list of to-dos and initiatives that they're working on. And if you want a CX initiative to rise towards the top of their list and you need their cooperation, the governance structure is a way to get that to happen.
Great point. Yeah, if we don't put put some type of structure or scaffolding to it, even the best of intentions and best of metrics really won't have a process. What would you say about kind of the other side of this? Just the I use the term ground level. I mean, that could refer to managing up, that can refer to boards, but it seems like so many of the things that can ultimately make or break a program have to do with these changes, maybe in the executive constellation and a new stakeholder coming on board, having like a quick win to show and finding the right time to show that to make the right impact, the right ask. What has worked, for you, and what have you seen work for being able to be responsive and opportunistic, are some other words that kind of come to mind.
I'll jump in there. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily always have to be ground level, but making sure that the stakeholders that you're trying to, make change happen with are involved in the process. So as a CX leader or a voice of the customer, program lead, you're basically providing an internal service to those stakeholders, right? And so just as you want to emphasize the company to empathize with their customers, you should empathize as a CX leader with your internal customers and try to find out what's important to them and ask them what kind of questions that they would like to ask in customer surveys. Ask them how they would like to see results presented. Ask them, what kind of changes or improvements are kind of top of mind for them. And then whenever you do have results that come out from research, make sure that you don't blindside them, because often you're going to have bad news about something that they are responsible for, and you don't want them to see it for the first time in a public domain. So go give them an advanced reading, do a one-on-one with them and tell them, hey, there's some bad news coming down the pipe about your functional area in this new research report. Let's talk about it and see how we can frame a response to it. Things like that.
How do you guys get? I mean, it seems like some of these things are tactics. Some of these things are characteristics that people are born with. Some folks are a little bit more naturally, in tune or intuitive about how to play the organizational game. How specifically for CX, how do you guys see people getting better at that? Where are the places people can learn to improve their skills that relate to this kind of thing?
I think a lot of it comes from experience, right? And I'll go back to what I said about baby steps, right? There's no way to do it but just to dive in. I don't know of a course. Well, maybe I suppose there are courses that are going to teach you how to be influential or how to, get these things done. But most of us don't and haven't attended those courses, so so we kind of learn on the fly, and listening to conversations like this and learning and reading and understanding what some of those paths are to get to have those conversations. But then ultimately it's really about going and doing it, and once you get it done the first time, it's a little bit easier. It gets a little bit easier, and it may be rough around the edges, and maybe somebody will give you feedback, but it's I'm going to say hands-on learning, because that's how I came up through it too, and I know a lot of other folks have as well. But Gary, if you've got some advice, I'm open for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to develop the skills, and not everyone is going to go to that course or read those books. I think a large part of it is just changing your mindset and just making a decision like, okay, I am providing an internal service, and I am going to develop an internal brand for that service that displays to the company how I'm having impact to the business by improving customer experience. And then I am going to go out and try to sell that service to my internal customers who aren't buying it all the time. So I think it's more of a decision to kind of step out of your box, step out of your shell, and reach out and be more proactive and engaging the rest of the company.
I love that. I mean, I think it's so easy to, at times, we see CX folks taking a bit of a almost a martyr-like posture. There's this cause, we're trying to make the organization be empathic, and nobody wants to do it. And the reality is that the insights that we're sitting on, the perspectives that we have, are good for the business. This isn't something we have to feel we need to fall on our sword for. There are tools, there are things like Thematic out there that can help you get the insights you need. I do want to give a plug, I think, for both of I know that West Monroe also did a survey with CXPA on different tactics can be used, and I think you also, as we're talking about this, Gary referenced you have a list of kind of metrics that will get executives' attention, so people can reach out to you for those things. And Annette, I loved the article that you had on the CX perception gap. If anybody hasn't seen that, check it out on social media. She really references how different the view that executives oftentimes have of their customer is from reality, and some great ways not just to close that gap, but all the different things that are really at our disposal to do about it. So yeah, really good. We can be champions here, and there are things that we should, I guess, like you're saying, Gary, own that and step into that, and don't be afraid to own what you're doing for the customer and the company. Love that.
I would agree too. I mean, it's all good stuff, right? I mean, nothing that we're doing is negative. It's ultimately going to cost money, but it's also going to ultimately save money and bring in more money. But there are things that CX professionals can do that don't cost any money, right? There are a lot of things that we can do to improve the experience that don't cost a dime, and some of those are just purely human things that we can do differently. And I think that's an important note to take.
Great. Well, we are, let's see here, at the
let's do the draw.
About 11:54. Yeah, if people have other questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. I encourage you to check out both Gary and Annette on LinkedIn. Lots of information there. And I think I'll pass it to Alyona here to do our drawing.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So not everybody who responded to the survey left an email address to get into the draw. So we have about 130 emails. So Annette, I'd like you to choose a number at random because you don't see my list. And on my side,
Yep.
I will tell you who that person is.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go with my favorite number. Don't know why it's my favorite, but it is number 12.
Number 12. Scrolling.
That's a great number.
Isn't it?
And so the winner is Andy McCatchen from ARQ Group.
So let's see. I don't know if Andy is here online. I can take a look at the attendees. Doesn't look like it. So we'll have to reach out to Andy. So yeah, I want to any closing thoughts or anything from either of the panelists here? It's been a really nice conversation.
I'm going to say congrats to Andy. Hopefully if he's not attending, he'll listen to this later. So congratulations. I think this is really important work, and I think this is an important topic, and it really is foundational. It's foundational in terms of this is the kind of work that needs to be done in order for the rest of it to come a little bit easier, right? It's foundational in the sense that if you don't have executive commitment and if you don't have, that governance structure, and you don't have some of the things that we talked about today, that it's going to be really, really hard to transform the business and to transform the experience. So that's my parting thought.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess my parting thought would be that don't feel like you're alone out there, and that even the best CX companies, USAA, you name them, even though they have the top CX rating, they don't always do well at all aspects of CX, and that there always is room for improvement, and there are always things that they just don't do very well. And so just kind of take that to heart and know that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be better than you were yesterday.
That's something we can all aspire to. Love that. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that then, guys. So, Leah, thank you so much for hosting us today. Thank you, Annette and Gary, for joining. Alyona and I really enjoyed this conversation, and look forward to seeing each of you hopefully at some of these upcoming local CXPA events.
Likewise.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Annette. Thanks, Eliana.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you again, everyone. All right.